Hi everyone, welcome.
Good evening everyone and welcome to this evening's presentation around the Macmillan Precinct Masterplan. Kev, can you see how many people we've got?
We're racing up to 25 so far.
All right.
Hi, Renee.
Okay, we're on a pretty tight schedule, so I think we'll get underway straight away. Thank you all for coming. We'll start with the acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and respect past, present and emerging leaders, their continuing cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, which continues to be important today. I thank them for their contribution made to life in the town of Victoria Park and to this region. So welcome everyone to our first webinar for the Macmillan Precinct. I'm not sure in this new age of digital technology how many people have actually been involved in this. It is a bit of a weird sensation doing a presentation to all these people that are out there, and I can't see any faces, so bear with us. We've got an exciting ride to go through with you this evening. I'd just like to welcome the Mayor who's joined us, Councillor Vernon, and we've also got the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ife, who's actually joining us as well, as I understand around 40 or 50 community members. So thank you all very much for giving up your time and coming this evening. So we've got a pretty tight packed agenda. We'll be talking about the project for the first 5 minutes and giving you an overview of what we've been doing. We're going to talk through the feedback that we've had from the community and how that's shaping up the planning, and then give you a rundown of how you can continue to be involved. There will be an opportunity for some Q&A and quick polling, but the way these webinar works is we try and encourage everyone to do the questions via the chat, and we've got a number of people who are moderating those questions behind the scenes. So at certain points in the presentation, we'll actually stop and I'll be throwing to our moderators and just getting some feedback on what those question and answers are. If we do have time, there potentially might be some opportunity for people to raise their hands and answer questions at the very end, but we would encourage you all to please make sure you get on the chat, the Q&A, and ask questions as we go, so we can make sure we can actually address them throughout the evening. So just in terms of some housekeeping for Zoom, the cameras are off. We will actually be recording and sharing this presentation. So if your friends have missed it, please encourage them to come and look at it later. As I mentioned, there'll be questions and feedback as we go, and we will encourage everyone, if we do run out of time and you would like some further information, we would ask you to put your questions on the Your Thoughts page. So although the session will go quickly, we're still open and available for any questions and answers that we don't get to. But again, please keep those questions coming. So firstly, for this evening, why are we actually planning? So we really need to start thinking about meeting the needs of a larger population within Macmillan Precinct and Vic Park. We know that it's a growing area. We know that the community facilities are needing to be renewed. We've heard very loudly and clearly that the community are very keen to make sure that we protect and enhance the green space and the trees. And we need to be thinking about responsible management of town finances. So all these things have been thrown into the mix as we've been working through this process over the last five or so months. We know that places are forever changing. It's often easy to get stuck in a point in time, but in the past, we know back in the 1930s, this area was a school. Back in the 70s, it was the first time the Vic Park Centre was changing. So now we need to be looking at what you would like to see in the future for Macmillan Precinct for the next 20, 30 and longer years beyond. So we need to bear in mind, it's not just about thinking of the needs today, it's very much about thinking of the needs of the future. So as I mentioned, Vic Park is growing rapidly. So by 2036, you're going to have 50% more residents. You're already starting to see some of that transformation along Albany Highway with some of the apartments and the buildings that are popping up. You know, the last few recent months has really made us look back with COVID and really question how we work and the opportunities to work from home and the new technologies and how that's really going to shake things up. We know that there's people are wanting to move out of cars and think differently about future transit options. And services and the way people access services and facilities are changing. So the way that people access the library, for example, is changing all the time. So it's really important that there's flexible facilities in place that can actually accommodate those needs. We also know that the buildings are ageing on site, particularly the rec centre and the library. So there's been condition assessments that have looked at the need for significant upgrades and repairs. We know that there's accessibility and functionality issues. There's a poor relationship with a lot of the existing services and facilities. Like, for example, at the moment, there's safety and security issues. So people accessing the gym can't actually access the green space and the oval. So it's about addressing those issues and seeing what can be done to get a better outcome. In terms of the bottom line, we know the leisure life is really approaching end of life and it needs replacing. A significantly larger library is required to meet the local needs. There's a review of design and location of all the facilities on site needed to really ensure suitability. So we've been doing a lot of talking with the community about what potential co-location opportunities might work and how groups can work better together. Council has a responsibility to make sure that it is responsibly manages its finances. And this really is a great opportunity to think about some great place-based priorities for the community into the future. So at the end of the day, it's also about balancing the funding. So we've been talking to the community members and the working group that have been involved around how to address those funding challenges. So it's about looking at what the costs might be in terms of new buildings and services and staff. And it's also about looking at what potential funding opportunities might be. It's also about looking at where the services are located and rationalisation. So from the council's perspective, it has growing communities in other areas as well. So it's about balancing where those facilities might be and where they might remain and where they might be in different places into the future. So in terms of the project timeline, we started this project in February. Some of you may have already been involved in the digital engagement and the vision workshop that we did back in February and April. That culminated into a series of surveys and listening posts where we came up with a vision charter. We then, we were intending to do a physical place design forum, but COVID hit. So we had to reconsider what we were doing, and we have appointed a working group, and we've been embarking on some place design workshops virtually, which I'll talk you through. And from here, we're going to be looking at refining some scenarios and deciding the future direction, getting input from the working group, but also the wider community in terms of where that direction might be. And that will ultimately result in a preferred scenario and detailed master planning, which will commence from September. So in terms of the working group, we appointed 30 representatives, which include 10 site stakeholders. So we went out for an open expression of interest, and we had some very great interest. Hopefully, unfortunately, some people were unsuccessful, and hopefully they're here tonight being able to listen in. So we're really pleased with the interest that we received, and we're really pleased with the group that's actually been appointed. We've got a really great balance of diverging, differing views and differing ages and demographics. And again, I would imagine many of the working group members are actually participating in this session tonight and are going to be joining us for another focus group once this concludes this evening. So as I mentioned, what will the end result be? We're going to be looking at 3 different scenarios. We'll be coming up with a preferred scenario, and that will then follow on to a detailed master plan from September, which will be finalised in 2021. So have we got any questions or comments on the process so far, Kev, or any of the team?
Hi, Xander. We've had no formal Q&As come through the Q&A option. So if people are unfamiliar with where that's at, it's the Q&A tab with the 2 little speech bubbles down the bottom. If you click on that, you can submit a question at any time. As we are talking, feel free to chip in and we'll be answering those live. We did get a few comments come through on the chat, however. I think Noel was querying where the costing and preliminary budget building condition assessments were for some of the existing facilities on the site. And Jack's pointed him to the Victoria Park website where we have those uploaded for review if anyone would like to take a look there.
Okay, Great. All right. Well, I'll keep trundling on through. Please make sure you keep those questions coming, and then we'll come back to them as we go. So what I'm going to do now is just talk in a little bit more detail about the information that we've been receiving along the way, and how that information and feedback is actually shaping the work that we're doing. So as I mentioned earlier, we did the preliminary engagement back in February through to April, where we had the survey, the listening posts, some stakeholder meetings, and the vision workshop. And from that, we came up with a community charter and appointed the working group. So what I've got on the screen here is the various sessions that we've been running through with the working group. It's been a really intensive program, and so they've had to put in some hours, and there's been a lot of ongoing discussion that's been happening on the background with a forum as well. So we started with a vision review and a site tour. We're looking at a virtual site tour with some observations. We then went in to talk about character and activity. We then had some sessions really focusing on design, landscape, facilities and funding. We then fed all those ideas into some scenario shaping ideas, which was the last session. And then tonight we're at the scenario refinement session. So the purpose of this evening is to give you a really great snapshot of the information that's been coming through those preceding sessions. So firstly, the vision charter, which was pulled together back in February, March, based on the workshops and stuff that we did early in the year. This has been actually up online, and we did workshop this with the community working group as well. So this is very much focused on the area shared commons, where culture, community and creativity intertwine, and it's about immersive green spaces, an eclectic mix of uses, and making sure that it's a unique destination. And that what sits behind that vision are some principles around the importance of green spaces, the importance of diversity and making sure that there's spaces for all, the whole idea of it being mixed together so there's great interface with the Park Centre and Albany Highway. And we originally had another driver which talked about like no other, but we got some feedback from the working group about the fact that it isn't necessarily about being iconic. It doesn't need to be flash and fancy. It needs to be functional, but more importantly, it really needs to reflect what is local about Vic Park. So we've actually amended that, and we'll continue to do so as we work through this process. So if anyone's interested, that is actually up on the website. So we'd encourage everyone to go and have a look and just review that if you'd like to read it in a bit more detail. But essentially this vision and principles is the guiding document, which is sort of shaping the scenarios and ultimately the master plan that we will pull together. When we did the site tour observations with the working group, some of the key issues that came up, and these seem to be recurring themes, was very much about improving access, and that is in terms of vehicular access and pedestrian access, as well as that connectivity with Albany Highway. So the east and west, as well as the north-south connections, are really important. Focusing on activity, making sure that there's diverse activity, a diverse range of activity, but also night and daytime uses. Improving safety. So safety came through really strongly through the initial digital engagement, and again through discussions with the working group. And then how can we really think about what those diverse spaces might be and how they can work together. So some common themes, accessibility being really important, the importance of some shared streets and beautiful thoroughfares, making sure we can really resolve some of that wasted space. What seems to come through really strongly time and time again is making sure that the green space and additional green spaces, if there can be, really become the prime focus of the community. Co-location for community services, and also thinking about what the staging might be into the future. So this is some of the feedback that we actually received through the forum. So, and it's sort of reflective of some of the key themes that are coming through. So people really value leisure life. We asked people, what would you like to see retain and what would you like to see removed? And a lot of people reiterated they don't want anything removed other than car yards and car parks. So it's very much about keeping the services in situ, but thinking about how those services can actually be rationalised to get some better social value. It's very much about clever design and modernisation and being as efficient as possible. Some of the other key themes that came through, really an acknowledgement that the facilities are run down, diverging views around some of the buildings, particularly the bowling club, for example, whether that should be retained or because it's got quite a lot of charm, or should it actually be modernised and relocated. Looking at ways to try and reimagine the site and explore new uses, but at the end of the day, retaining that spectrum of services. So all these ideas have really fed into the scenarios that we've been working on and what we've come up with. So we also ran some exercises through a World Cafe where we explored some ideas around what place might look like. Things like that, how do we get the local flavour? Sustainability came through as very important. The importance of spaces for lingering, and also evening spaces. So looking at day and nighttime activity. The importance of urban form, scale and building design came through really prominently. Good quality being important, that mix of old and new. And again, the green, the look and feel in terms of the building, and the importance of the landscape is just that recurring theme that people are really find really valuable. So here are some of the parks and landscape ideas that have been suggested. In terms of some of the directions we're thinking about for the scenarios, it's very much about how can we have flexible, programmable spaces so it can be unstructured, try not to overload it, thinking about potentially a regional attraction for the landscape and the playground, but considering the teams, the young adults, and also places for kids to explore. Really exploring ways to express that history and natural systems. So how can cultural heritage and natural water flow play a role in the site? Also thinking about endemic diversity. So it's not just about grass and trees. So what are some of the other native plants that can be brought in? And thinking about, as a modern community, how to create some new experiences in terms of piazzas and arbours and pocket parks, yarning circles. So there's active places, but there's also quiet places for contemplation. So some of the ideas here in terms of co-location, recreation, and really looking at those multi-purpose uses and how they might actually work. So a space isn't necessarily just for one use, it can actually be designed and accommodate for multi-use at any point in time. So in terms of the scenario direction, things like how can we look at green landscape integration through soft landscaping, through courtyard spaces? How can the building design really blur those indoor and outdoor spaces? What can we do around co-location to make sure we get efficiency and preserve green space and even increase the amount of green space? What can we do around combining and layering those uses, and really think about that third place where people can share and exchange ideas, and you're not only going there for one particular use. And at the end of the day, thinking about design that is welcoming, it's safe, it really frames the park, it considers the heritage, but it's also attractive and versatile. So it doesn't need to be showy, but it's timeless. We also had some discussion around the funding approaches. So bearing in mind, there's one element of, is it about the capital replacement costs of the infrastructure, but there's also the ongoing operation and management, and how the town can actually service and fund this infrastructure and services into the future. And some of the feedback that we got from the working group around this was the importance of really looking at bigger picture opportunities. So not necessarily just focused on this site, but maybe look at other funding opportunities outside of Macmillan Precinct. There were some diverging views in relation to land sales. So some people are supportive of land sales as long as there's some tight restrictions around what those development conditions might be. Others don't support land sale at all and would like the council to actually retain ownership of the land, given it's a significant asset, bulk asset that's owned by the council. Whatever happens though, the community are adamant that the outcomes need to be aligned to community expectations. There's also very strong support for it remaining as a community-focused precinct. So, you know, it's about community services, it's about not-for-profit, it's about the rec centre, it's about the arts, it's about all those elements coming together and not necessarily just a commercial precinct. Housing in appropriate areas was considered suitable, but staging again is really important, and the importance of actually looking out and beyond the neighbours. So where we're at the moment is, and I'm going to throw to Andrew in a second for him to talk through in a bit more detail. We've come up with some early ideas, and the working group have actually contributed some ideas and suggestions as well. We workshop those with the working group. We're starting to refine those into 3 broad scenarios, which we're going to touch on really lightly tonight, but we're actually going to be working through with the working group later this evening to get their feedback. We're then going to be going out and communicating that information. I'll come back and give you a bit more detail around that. We'll come up with a preferred scenario, and then the detailed master planning will begin. So I'll hand you over to Andrew now, and you can talk through the early ideas.
Thank you, Xander. Good evening, everybody. You may need to share your screen, Xander, otherwise you can flick straight through yourself.
I've stopped sharing it. Is that okay, or do you want me to share it?
Let's give it a go. All right, yeah.
You might want to do Control L. Yep.
Okay.
The joys of technology.
Can everybody see that?
All
okay,
good.
so we begun by preparing 5 ideas that apply the principles that we gain from the working group to the site in different spatial manners. So this is the first one, which we call Current Plus, which is one of the more low intervention options, which involves recreation and community uses generally in their same locations. However, in upgraded, expanded, or slightly rationalised forms, new north-south and east-west connections through the site, and opportunities for new development as a result of all that. Feedback on this particular idea was mixed, that it was too simple and conservative, not aspirational enough, lack of integration with the central access for facilities, and lack of activity in the park, and not really addressing some of those existing issues around safety and security within the park. So the second idea that we tested was what we called Parkside, which involved pushing all of the community and recreational facilities more towards the north of the site. I should say that within all of these scenarios, they involved retention of the existing park and also trees around the site. This option involved rationalisation of the bowls to 2 greens integrated into the park, and then a new shared bowling club with the rec centre, and a library and community centre with a real presence on Albany Highway, new connections north and south, and other use opportunities. Feedback was that I like the bowl spilling out into the park, provided it's done well. You know, there's not chain wire fencing, it's integrated sensitively through hedging and shrubbery and the like. This promenade to Albany Highway, good support for that, but unsure about the new art space, which moved from its current location to a new modern facility on Sussex Street. Idea 3 was the courtyard. It involved, I guess, this idea of a new green space between the existing park and Albany Highway, library and community centre located on the corner of the park with an active edge to the park, and also Sussex Street, and the rec centre in a northern location to its current position for staging purposes and residential opportunities where that current location is. A new arts green space with the arts centre spilling out into a new green space to the south, and a new connection to Kent Street and Albany Highway. And feedback on that was more green space was great. Like the less prominent connection to Albany Highway, question marks over there being enough room for the bowls in that configuration. The fourth idea was Albany Hub, which was all about ultimately concentrating recreation and community uses between the park and Albany Highway in a layered formation. The Arts Centre where it is in an expanded format and framed around a new green space. And again, those new east-west and north-south connections, but really strong integration with Albany Highway and Sussex Street, and looking to reimagine Sussex Street as a more people-friendly place. The feedback was that they liked bringing in the buzz of Albany Highway. The stacking ideas were interesting, but the working group wanted to see us really test those ideas and be certain that it could work. Managing Sussex traffic would be a challenge, and potentially too much other uses under this scenario. And the fifth and final idea, high-level idea that we tested with the team, was in response to a working group members' idea to create much stronger connections to Albany Highway. So this was quite a blue sky idea of flipping the park around, keeping all of the existing trees where they are, through these green fingers that run into what would be a green spine running down the centre of the site with strong connections feeding into Albany Highway, and then the bowls moving to the southwest corner. The feedback there was it was probably, I like the ambition and thinking big. Moving park lessens the heritage value and tree experience, so that was a bit of a concern, and question marks over the overall benefit. So quite vexed opinions on that one. So I guess from there, we went into a 2-week period where the team got together and started to look at that working group feedback and how we could respond. In the meantime, we invited the working group members to actually submit some of their own spatial ideas, which was fantastic. And we got 2, and both sort of with some similarities, but differences as well. We're looking to incorporate many of the principles stemming from those ideas within the options that we're now about to give you a recap of or show you. So the scenario direction, I guess, stemming from all that was to retain green space and trees in their existing location, create new green experiences that draw people through the site, connect community facilities with each other and public spaces, be specific about potential other uses, ensure there's enough space for all community users, and test out different approaches, not just slight variations to the same thing. So right now we'll give you a very quick sneak peek of those scenarios or that we've developed, 5 down to 3. Still very much a draft work in progress, still to be finalised following review by the working group and council, and more detailed exploration of landscape design and facility layout and funding implications is underway. And these scenarios will be shared for public feedback on the 29th of June. So just quickly, I guess the first one was really, it brought in ideas from those ideas 1, 3, 7A and 7C. This option, I guess, is the lower intervention option. New leisure life and library in existing locations generally. Bowls Clubhouse, retain, refurbish. We're still looking at that north-south and east-west connection, but the Bowls greens push further towards Sussex Street in response to that feedback from the working group. A new arts culture courtyard, which was an idea from both Joni and Pete, the working group, carrying that through, and limited development. Scenario 2 brought in elements from ideas 2, 5 and 6. It was about pushing those recreation or concentrating those recreation and community orientated uses towards Kent Street, retaining most of the park or the balance of the park for unstructured play, and a library and community building with pride of place on Albany Highway. And the third scenario was really a combination of ideas 2 and 4, the Grand Civic Hub. in the middle of the site with vertical layering of uses, really, I guess the nexus that, I guess, all of those connections spin off with good, strong relationships with Albany Highway and the park. And looking to incorporate that story of water movement from the top of the park through to the sump and Albany Highway through different water sensitive urban design opportunities and spatial experiences. Xander, I might hand over to you now.
All right, thank you, Andrew. So what we would like to do now is open up for some questions, but as you can see here, I think, and Darren actually asked a question, I think, that I just noticed. So the purpose of tonight is really just a bit of a context and a bit of a briefing ahead of us actually promoting these and launching these scenarios for feedback on the 29th of June. So as Andrew said, we're going to be going to the working group tonight and to council next week to get some feedback. But then what we would like you to do is actually come back to us with your detailed feedback from the 29th of June. The scenarios will be up on the Your Thoughts website, and there will be listening posts around council. So we would encourage you to go to the Macmillan Park Working Group project site for that information. We'll then be looking at preparing a preferred scenario, which will be another webinar, which we'll present to on the 20th of July. That will also be another process that will go out for public feedback. So that will be publicised from the 27th of July to the 16th of August to get some feedback on that preferred scenario. And then finally, a report will be submitted to council. So this is only very much the start of the process, but we're keen to get your feedback and input and any questions on the process or what we've actually what we've discussed to date. So I might just throw to Kev and see if there's been any questions that we should talk to.
Hi everyone, can I get my video working? Let's see. We've only had about 7 or 8 questions, so maybe as I read through some of the ones that we've been answering, if anyone would like to just type in a question in that Q&A box now, and we might be able to just answer them live for you by talking. But let me just run through the kind of questions that have been covered. I think, Xana, you covered Darren's query about tonight really just being to give you a bit of background and bring you up to speed on where we've been heading with our working group in anticipation of those more detailed scenarios being released. We've had a query just asking whether those final uses have already been decided upon, and I guess the answer to that is no. We're still very much at an early point of the process, and even the kind of arrangements in these scenarios are still an open question, let alone whatever that final arrangement might be based on the community's feedback. We had a question around things perhaps looking a bit expensive and how that might be paid for. And indeed, funding is of course an essential component of any kind of facility planning. We've been focusing on that a lot with our working group, and there will be future opportunities for feedback from the wider community on the kind of funding options they'd like to see pursued. A few questions here coming through just now, looking for a bit more detail on what those scenarios are. You know, we obviously flick through them really quickly, a bit hard to kind of work out what's happening. Apologies about that. Hopefully we've maybe just whet your appetite a little to get you thinking about what that might look like. But then you will have plenty of time to look over some more detailed drawings and information from the 29th of June. We'll be publishing some maps and some texts, so you can review all of that at your leisure and give us plenty of detailed feedback.
Kev, there's been a question as well from asking around whether the town has entered into or commenced discussions with developers regarding this site. And the Hawaiian is actually a member on the working group, and there's been some very high level initial discussions with Hawaiian, and the working group has actually expressed an interest of the importance of actually having a partnership in some regards with Hawaiian, given the importance of Sussex Street and that interface. But apart from that, there has been no discussions with developers regarding the site at all. It's very much about working with community to understand what the master plan needs to look like and what that delivery model will look like as well.
And it may be important, just to further clarify that is, it's a self-contained town process working based on community feedback. There are no developers or other parties to that process. It's purely one that the town is running with the local community.
I've noticed there's a member of the working group has also asked us to talk through some of the proposed other uses that would likely include and differentiating between the uses which could be the town of Vic Park owned uses versus potential land sale. So there has been some discussion with the working group around opportunities, for example, the town of Vic Park council office being moved to the site or not. Also talks around what community services might be, and that could potentially be not-for-profit community services which are commercial, as well as not necessarily services delivered by the town of Vic Park. And there's been also talk, I guess, of services such as childcare, maybe some entertainment, maybe some activities that bring in more nightlife. So maybe some music or some minimal food and beverage, but being conscious of not actually taking away from Albany Highway. So all this has actually been in the mix through the discussions, but nothing's been decided. And hopefully, have I missed anything, Kev or Andrew?
Yeah, maybe a few others that, of course, still very preliminary kind of spitballing of potential ideas and other uses that could be accommodated. I think some of the others that we're looking forward to discussing with the working group include specialty not-for-profit service providers, charitable organisations and others who might need some land to accommodate a specialised service that could bring some kind of social benefit to the town. And then other forms of revenue generating uses which have a strong social component to them, so they can help pay for the community facilities while also producing public good. And that could include things like intergenerational living, healthcare, uses that might be growing in demand as the Vic Park community grows and gets older. Do you want me to take another question, Xander, or
yes.
have you got one there?
You go, Kev.
I just noted there was a question asking about planned height limits for the site and density limits, both very important questions to ask, and both issues that we're still looking for community feedback on and haven't made any decisions on to date. So we'll make sure that when we do publish those scenarios for comment on the 29th, we'll throw out some suggestions there and get some community feedback on that. To date, in the working group, a lot of the focus has been on low-scale development, making sure it's consistent with the kind of height and development that's seen in the area currently. No skyscrapers so far have been suggested.
And just on that, in that same vein, there's been a question around considering some mixed-use lots with residential above, and some of these lots helping to activate the space with more people living there, and that is definitely being considered as part of that mix as well. Again, nothing decided, but it is actually being considered.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's an interesting idea. I think it's one that we're looking forward to a bit of feedback on. I guess there's a key question there around could that model actually help pay for some of those community facilities? Could we maybe put them for community facilities in that mix of uses? So thanks for the comment.
There is also a question around, is there consideration for town's administration to relocate onto the site? So that has been a discussion with the working group, and one of the scenarios does actually consider that as a potential option. But again, nothing's been decided, but it's just been thrown into the mix as a consideration.
Another question there asking that those diagrams be updated to better reflect private ownership. Again, that's a very good comment, and we'll ensure that the plans that do go out for public comment have got a high level of accuracy there around boundaries, ownership, and what those specific building footprints and uses will look like. We've been working with the working group discussing that generally, but when that does go out, we're looking to resolve that so that it's very easy and clear to see what's being suggested.
There's also another comment about the big issue of parking, which always comes up. So there's a comment around consideration for a multi-storey car park, so that people can actually stay in the area for an extended period of time. That again hasn't been resolved, but is actually being considered as part of the mix as well. And one of the scenarios actually does look, well, two of the scenarios do actually look at maybe trying to come up with some consolidated car parking opportunities. And some members of the working group have actually explored the idea of trying to look at collaboration opportunities with Hawaiian in relation to car parking as well. So that's something we'll continue to explore through the process.
I think just a quick one there. Jeremy has, from our working group, has just asked us to state that height limits have been discussed around the area. So yeah, that has been a focus of our discussion, and it will be a further discussion we'll be having tonight, in fact.
Okay. Are there any questions that we've missed? All right.
Got a few more questions coming in there. Shall we move on to the quick poll in the final 5 minutes?
Oh, that's a great idea.
We can keep answering questions.
Yeah, great idea, Kev.
So I'm about to launch a little poll just to get your first thoughts on the update that we've shared with you tonight, how you feel about the consultation process, what you'd like to learn more about before we get forward to releasing those concepts, anything that you like or are concerned by. So that should come up on your screen in a moment, and feel free to vote on that at your leisure. As we do that, let's see if any further comments are coming in.
I seem to have lost the questions.
Not seeing any votes coming in there. Can everyone see that on their screen okay?
All right. How's the poll going?
No answers so far. I'm not sure if people are having problems.
It says that
Oh,
okay.
There we go.
We've got some answers coming in. That'll be good. Everyone's probably thinking.
A few comments as they're coming in. I'd love to see a community theatre space that will provide a creative space for people of all ages, particularly the youth, and also bring more people into the area. Take advantage of the strip in the evening. Great suggestion. Thank you very much for that.
There's also a comment about, will the residential and mixed use with a meeting place coffee house opening onto the green space and create a relaxing meeting co-location with the library? I think that's definitely been a very popular idea and is actually considered in the one of the scenarios as well. There's been a lot of talk about that green space frame, the buildings being able to frame the green space. Sorry, Kev.
No, just quiet encouragement to keep those responses to the poll questions rolling in. And we've got about 20 people responding so far, and a query/comment thinking about giving some consideration to creating a wider public open space corridor emanating from the Albany Highway Strip. Something that we'll definitely raise with our working group, and if that is a strong idea that you'd like to advocate for, please let us know when you submit your feedback after the 29th of June.
So I think I've got someone asking, where do we find the poll? So if you look down the bottom of the screen, there should be, there's a icon that looks like a graph. Maybe if you click on that, the poll should come up.
Well, you might have to have a little hunt around your windows on your computer screen. It should have popped up for you automatically. It might just be hiding behind something else.
All right, how are the answers coming along, Kev? Have we got...
Good. Conscious of time, we've got a meeting scheduled with our working group right afterwards, which is a bit of a pinch. So if you can get those final answers in before we say goodnight to you all.
Are there any final questions in the last minute or so?
Comment looking for some multi-storey parking on the Park Centre site, pardon me. A question about there being a caveat on the land and a request that we share a private answer publicly. I think we have some information available on the town's website, and we'll be happy to provide that to the community, confirming that there is a caveat that currently protects the current footprint of John Macmillan Park. We haven't investigated that in detail, but as all of the scenarios show that park space remaining the same across the mall, we think we're adhering to that currently, and would look forward to any further comments on that when the options go out for public comment.
All right. Kev, do you want to, can we put up the poll?
Let me just do a quick read through while it's still open. I would hate to cut anyone off if they're still answering. Lots of interest in hearing more about how those facilities and community services will look and feel. That was the most common request for more information. It's followed by the big issue of funding. People are quite excited by the prospect of new and upgraded facilities and services and enhancing public space. The third most popular concept there is improving connections to Albany Highway. The biggest concerns there are the question of funding and how it's paid for, the kind of open question of heights and density, and then I think a few uncertainties around how the location of some of those facilities might play out. Looking forward to getting some much more detailed feedback from you all once we release those options for comment. And I might throw it to Xander now to say goodnight.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time this evening. We look forward to you. Please keep an eye out on the 29th of June. If you can pop back into the council's website, and the scenarios will be up. There will be a survey where we'll be asking you to provide us some quite detailed feedback. Bear in mind that the scenarios, it may not be that it'll be one particular scenario that you would like. It'll probably end up being a situation where there'll be elements of particular scenarios that will culminate into the preferred scenario. So please take the time and give us some detailed feedback on what you like and what you don't like about each of the scenarios. So that'll be up from the 29th of June. And then we look forward, hopefully you've enjoyed the session this evening. We look forward to getting that feedback and then meeting all again on the 20th of July with an update on the preferred scenario. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to your feedback over the next couple of weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good evening.
Quick message for our working group. We'll be commencing our separate meeting right now. If you'd like to run and take a quick break, please do so. You'll have to rejoin that separate meeting invitation, which has come through separately. See you in the other Zoom session.